My brother kept tapping the paper against his palm while he talked, a steady rhythm that made it hard to focus on anything else. The sound filled the gaps between his sentences like a countdown. He said the account had been stable for years. Birthday money, small scholarships, a few careful investments our parents helped him set up. Everyone in the family treated that fund like something fragile and important. It had a purpose, and now almost half of it was gone. He slid the statement across the table toward me but stopped halfway, like he didn't want to get too close. I didn't reach for it anyway. I already knew what it would show, a series of transfers over several months, clean numbers. Round amounts, planned, just explain it, he said. Not loud. Not emotional. That calm tone made it worse than yelling. Our mother folded her hands together like she was waiting for a confession. Our father avoided my eyes and stared at the corner of the table. I could feel the moment stretching, thick and slow. If I denied everything, they would push harder. If I told the truth, the damage would spread in directions none of them expected. So I said the only safe thing I could think of: I didn't steal anything. My brother let out a short breath through his nose. That's not what the bank says. And sitting there, with 3 people waiting for me to prove I wasn't a thief. I realized something that made my chest tighten. I had never actually planned what would happen if the money disappeared. My brother and I had always operated on a quiet kind of trust. Not the emotional, talk about your feelings kind, more like an understanding that certain responsibilities just fell into place. He handled school and planning ahead. I handled practical things. Repairs, paperwork, anything that required patience more than ambition. The college fund ended up in my hands almost by accident. Years ago, when the account was first set up, he was still a minor and our parents didn't trust themselves with online banking. They forgot passwords, ignored emails, and panicked whenever a confirmation code didn't arrive fast enough. I was the one who sat on hold with customer support and figured things out. So the access stayed with me. Technically it was his account, but I managed the transfers and settings. Everyone knew it. No one thought it was strange. It was just another small duty that landed on my side of the line. At first, I took it seriously. I checked balances once a month, moved small amounts into safer options, made sure nothing looked suspicious. When relatives sent money for birthdays or holidays, I deposited it the same day. My brother used to joke that his future depended on me not being lazy. I told him he was safe, and for a long time, he was. That's why the accusation felt heavier than just suspicion. He wasn't guessing. He knew I had the ability to move the money. Which meant the real question at the table wasn't whether I could take it, it was whether I had decided to, and the truth was. The first transfer hadn't felt like a decision at all. It felt temporary, necessary, something that would be fixed before anyone noticed. The first transfer happened late at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed. I remember sitting at my desk with only the monitor lighting the room, the balance displayed in a clean row of numbers that felt strangely distant from real life. I didn't rush, that's the part one keep replaying in my head. If it had been panic, or some impulsive mistake, maybe I could have explained it differently. Instead I double-checked everything like I always did: account numbers, confirmation codes, the final amount, a careful withdrawal, small enough that it wouldn't stand out right away, but large enough to matter. When the confirmation message appeared, I sat there for a while with my hand still on the keyboard. I expected to feel something sharper, guilt, maybe, or relief. Instead there was just a dull pressure in my chest, like I'd agreed to something without fully understanding the terms. The plan was simple: replace it within a month. No one would ever know. I even wrote the number down on a scrap of paper and tucked it into my desk drawer like a reminder to fix the mistake. Every time I opened that drawer afterward, the folded paper sat there waiting, quiet and patient. The problem wasn't the first transfer, it was how quickly it stopped feeling temporary, because once the money had been used, the situation didn't resolve the way I expected. It only created new problems, ones that needed more time, more patience, and eventually more money than I had planned. By the time I realized how far it had gone, the account balance had already started to look wrong, and around that time, my brother began asking questions that sounded casual, but weren't. At first, my brother's questions sounded harmless. He'd lean against the doorframe while I was on my laptop and ask things like, "Did the account grow much this year? Or are the investments still the same?" He said it in that distracted way he had, like he was thinking about 5 other things at once. I answered without hesitation, everything's stable. Technically, that wasn't a lie. Nothing unusual showed up on the statements except what I had done myself. No fraud alerts. No strange charges. Just clean transfers that looked intentional, but he started checking in more often. One afternoon he asked if he should download the banking app himself, since he was old enough now. I told him the setup was complicated and I'd help him later. He nodded, but the way he paused before leaving made me uneasy. It wasn't suspicion exactly, more like curiosity that had begun turning into something sharper. Around the same time, our parents started talking about deadlines, application fees, housing deposits, tuition estimates. Numbers were coming up in casual conversation that suddenly sounded dangerous to me. Every mention of college made me mentally calculate how much time I had left, how quickly I could replace what was missing. I told myself it was manageable. Pick up extra work. Cut spending. Move things around quietly. The math almost worked if nothing unexpected happened. But something always did, and eventually I realized the real problem wasn't the amount anymore. It was the fact that I couldn't give him access to the account, not without exposing everything, because the moment he logged in, the timeline would tell the story before I ever said a word. Keeping control of the account became less about responsibility and more about containment. Whenever my brother mentioned setting up his own login, I found a way to delay it. I said the bank required paperwork. I said we needed our parents present. Once, I even claimed the system was temporarily locked after a security update. None of it sounded dramatic enough to trigger alarm, but I could tell he was starting to keep track. He wasn't careless the way people assumed. Quiet didn't mean passive. When he focused on something, he followed it through. That's what worried me. The account itself had no secrets except the transfers, but the dates told a story, a steady pattern stretching across months. Anyone looking closely would see intention there. Planning. Not a single mistake that could be brushed off, and the truth was, I had planned it. Not the beginning, maybe, but everything that came after. One evening he asked me for the balance while we were sitting in the living room. No warning, no build-up, just roughly, he said. I want to estimate expenses. I gave him a number close to the real one, but not exact. Close enough to sound natural. He nodded slowly like he was comparing it to something in his head. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. It wasn't confrontation, not yet, but it felt like a checkpoint I had barely passed, because by then the missing money wasn't the only thing weighing on me. There was also the reason it had been spent, and the longer I kept that reason hidden, the more impossible it became to explain, especially to the one person who would understand it the least. As the months passed, conversations at home started orbiting around my brother's future like it was a shared project. Deadlines went up on the fridge. Printed checklists appeared on the counter. Our parents talked about tuition the way people talk about weather, constantly, casually, as if repetition might make it easier to handle. I learned to stay quiet when those conversations started. Every estimate they mentioned turned into a silent calculation in my head. I tracked the numbers automatically, what had been taken, what still needed replacing, how long it might take before the balance looked normal again. I picked up extra shifts and stopped spending on anything unnecessary. Some weeks I barely left the house except for work. The plan depended on steady progress, small corrections that would eventually erase the damage. It almost worked. The balance began creeping upward again, slow but steady. If no one checked too closely, the account might pass for untouched by the time he needed it. That fragile sense of control lasted until one evening when my father asked a simple question across the dinner table: how much is in the fund right now? Not directed at my brother, at me, I answered without hesitating. The number was prepared in my head like a rehearsed line. He nodded, satisfied, but my brother looked over at me with a faint crease between his eyebrows. Not accusation, comparison, like he was measuring what I said against something he already knew. Later that night I heard him on the phone in the next room, speaking quietly. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught one phrase clearly enough to make my stomach tighten. Not just confirming the account details. That was the moment I realized time had almost run out. The next morning he acted completely normal, which somehow felt worse than confrontation. He poured cereal, scrolled through his phone, asked if anyone had seen his headphones. No tension in his voice, no sideways looks. If he had talked to the bank the night before, he gave no sign of it. For a few hours I convinced myself I'd misunderstood what I heard. Then, sometime in the afternoon, he knocked on my door, not hard. Just once, when I opened it, he was holding a small notebook, the kind he used for planning things, and he stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "I talked to the bank," he said, calm and direct, "no build-up, they explained how to get full access." I nodded slowly, like this was expected. He flipped the notebook open and ran a finger down a column of numbers. Dates. Balances. Estimates. He'd been reconstructing the account month by month from old statements and deposit records. It was close, closer than I thought he'd ever get without seeing the actual transactions. "There's a gap," he said, not angry. "Just precise." I told him the investments fluctuated sometimes. Market changes, timing differences, small fees. I spoke carefully, the same tone I used with customer support agents and paperwork, steady, reasonable. He listened without interrupting. Then he closed the notebook and looked at me in a way that made it clear the conversation wasn't really about math anymore. "If something happened," he said, "you can just tell me." For a second I almost did, but the image that came to mind stopped me cold, the one truth that couldn't be taken back once spoken, so I shook my head, and that was the moment he stopped trusting me. The confrontation at the kitchen table didn't happen right away. For a few days after that conversation in my room, my brother barely spoke to me at all. Not openly hostile, just distant in a deliberate way, like he was organizing something in his head before making a move. Then one evening he asked me to step outside with him. We stood near the driveway where our voices wouldn't carry back into the house. He had the same notebook with him, but this time he didn't open it. "I figured it out," he said. Those words landed heavier than the accusation later would. He said he'd checked transfer records connected to the account. Not the full statements, he still didn't have those, but enough to see where the money had ended up. He named the bank where my personal account was held and watched my face for a reaction. I didn't give him one. "You moved it to yourself," he said quietly. "Probably because you needed it." He spoke carefully, like someone trying to be fair. "You can just say that. If you were in trouble or something." There was even a hint of sympathy in his voice, which made the explanation sound reasonable, almost generous. Financial trouble. Poor judgment. A temporary loan that got out of control. It was a story people understood, a story that could eventually be forgiven, and for a moment, I considered agreeing with him. It would have been easier to let everyone believe I'd taken the money for myself. Because the truth wasn't something he could forgive, so I said nothing. He took my silence as confirmation, and a few days later, he told our parents. After he told our parents, the house settled into a kind of strained quiet that felt heavier than open arguments. No one yelled. No one demanded immediate explanations. Instead, everything slowed down into careful conversations that stopped whenever I walked into the room. They thought I didn't notice, but I heard enough. My mother asking whether the bank could reverse transfers. My father wondering if there were penalties or legal issues. My brother explaining what he'd pieced together, sticking to facts and timelines like he was presenting a case, and every version of the story ended the same way. I had taken the money because I needed it. The strange thing was how reasonable that sounded when I heard it out loud. I had been working more hours than usual. I kept to myself. I avoided questions about my finances. From the outside, it fit together neatly. If I had been in their place, I probably would have believed it too. That realization almost pushed me toward confessing, not the real story, just the version they already accepted. Apologize. Promise repayment. Take responsibility and move forward. It would have kept things contained. Instead, I kept waiting for the right moment to explain the truth, some calm conversation where I could lay everything out without panic or interruption. That moment never came, because the longer I stayed silent, the more certain everyone became that silence meant guilt. And there was one more reason I couldn't speak. Every time I imagined telling them, I pictured one person's reaction first, not my brother's, not my parents', someone else's, someone who sat at that same kitchen table every day pretending nothing had happened. It all came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I'd been avoiding the living room for hours, pretending to tidy my room while my brother paced quietly below, occasionally muttering numbers under his breath. I knew he was reconstructing the timeline, measuring every deposit, every withdrawal, every small discrepancy. I couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, I had to confront him, or let him confront me. I stepped out of my room, hands shoved into my pockets, trying to look casual. He didn't look up from the notebook. He didn't need to. I could feel the weight of his attention like a physical push. "I need to know why," he said finally, voice steady, eyes sharp. "Just tell me what you did." I swallowed. My throat felt dry, my stomach knotted. One part of me wanted to blurt it all out, the whole story, every reason, every choice I'd made to protect someone. The other part knew that if I did, nothing could be taken back. Family dynamics aren't forgiving when secrets get exposed, and this one. This one could break more than just trust, so I stayed quiet. He slammed the notebook shut. "Fine," he said, but it wasn't fine. The quiet that followed was heavy enough to crush. He didn't storm off. He didn't yell. He just stood there, eyes lingering on me, measuring every micro-expression. For the first time, I realized that keeping silent had already set a new reality. Everyone believed I had stolen the money. Everyone assumed the worst. And the truth, the part that could have saved someone else from blame, was locked inside me. That day, I understood the full weight of my decision: protect the innocent, or preserve my own freedom from accusation. I had chosen the first, and the cost was only beginning to show. The truth wasn't that I needed the money. Not in the way my brother assumed. Not for bills, not for fun, not for some reckless spending. The money had gone somewhere else entirely, to my little sister. She wasn't even in college yet. She was still in high school, juggling part-time jobs and tutoring. A few months back, she had been diagnosed with a condition that required treatment our insurance only partially covered. The bills stacked up faster than she could handle, and she didn't tell anyone, not even our parents. She didn't want to stress them, didn't want anyone thinking she couldn't manage. I found out only because she slipped a note under my door, vague, worried, pleading. Reading it, I realized the money she needed would exceed her savings, and if she asked our parents, the entire family budget would implode. Tuition, bills, savings, everything was carefully balanced, and one unexpected medical cost could derail it all, so I made the transfers. Careful, methodical, as if I were moving chess pieces. I kept track of every cent. The plan wasn't to steal, it was to cover her emergency without creating panic. I intended to replenish the account once I had the means, before anyone noticed, but timing failed me. My brother discovered the discrepancies before the replenishment, pieced together the numbers, and assumed the worst. What he saw was technically correct: the money moved from his fund, but he had no idea of the reason. Sitting at that kitchen table, knowing my brother thought I had betrayed him, I had to choose silence again. Revealing the truth meant exposing my sister, the very person I had tried to protect, and in that moment, I realized moral right and wrong weren't as clear as the numbers on the bank statement. After the revelation, or rather, after the confrontation that never actually revealed the truth, the atmosphere at home shifted. My brother treated me differently, even though he didn't accuse me again openly. There was distance in his tone, a careful politeness that felt colder than anger. Every family dinner felt like a minefield, every casual question about finances made my chest tighten. I watched our parents struggle too. They couldn't understand the timeline, the transfers, or the secrecy. They were stuck between believing my brother, who had numbers and logic on his side, and me, who they thought had hidden motives. I tried to stay neutral, to act like nothing had happened. But neutrality felt like lying. Every smile, every nod, carried the weight of unspoken truths. My sister, meanwhile, didn't know I had been discovered. She continued life as if nothing had happened, unaware of how close she had come to sparking family collapse. Protecting her had come at a cost I hadn't fully anticipated. The relationship with my brother was fractured, and even our parents now viewed me with cautious suspicion. Even friends who knew some of the story offered advice that felt like judgment. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" they asked. "It could have prevented all this." And I had to nod, knowing that honesty would have hurt the very person I was trying to save. I started to realize something critical: some decisions have consequences no one sees coming. You think you're shielding someone, and in the process, you're reshaping every relationship around you. Trust gets stretched thin, patience wears out, and love, even when well-intentioned, can feel like betrayal. The family I had tried to protect was still intact in one sense, but in another, pieces had shifted, never quite fitting together the way they used to. Weeks passed after the confrontation that never became a confession, and the house settled into a strange rhythm. My brother avoided me when he could, but when forced together, he was civil. Our parents no longer asked about the fun directly, though I could see the unspoken tension in their glances. My sister went on with her life, blissfully unaware of the chaos her need had quietly sparked. I began questioning my own choices constantly. Had I done the right thing by staying silent? Protecting my sister felt like the only morally defensible decision at the time, but the cost was heavier than I expected. A relationship with my brother, built over years of quiet understanding, was now layered with suspicion. Even small gestures, handing him the cereal, fixing a broken shelf, felt weighted, as if every action carried judgment I could not see. And then came the hardest part, the internal debate that never let me rest. Was the silence justified because it shielded someone vulnerable, or was it a selfish act disguised as protection? I had rationalized it countless times in my head, but rationalizing doesn't erase the way it feels when someone you love assumes the worst about you. Some nights I imagine telling my brother the truth, fully and finally, and wonder if that would repair what's broken or destroy it completely. Other nights, I think of keeping the secret forever, preserving my sister's peace but living with the quiet burden of being misunderstood. I don't have an answer. And maybe that's the point. Some choices aren't about right or wrong, they're about weighing risks, consequences, and loyalties in a world that refuses to give clear instructions. So I sit here, still holding the truth close, knowing it has cost me far more than money ever could.